Aiden Pearce is often remembered as one of gaming's worst protagonists, bland, brooding, unlikable, and for years that criticism went largely unchallenged. But what if Watch Dogs was never a story about a man seeking revenge? What if the darkness everyone criticized, the brooding, the obsession, the refusal to let go, was never bad writing? What if Watch Dogs was always about something much more human than that? What if Aiden Pearce's story was about grieving? Because before the night everything changed, Aiden Pearce was a family man. He loved his sister, he loved his niece and his nephew. He would take them on these adventures even when things didn't always go the way he hoped. He was the kind of uncle who showed up, who made memories, and who cared. But then a hacker job goes wrong. A hit gets put out on him, and Lena, the niece he loved like a daughter, ends up dead because of it. His nephew develops PTSD, his sister is consumed by grief, and Aiden is left carrying something he has no idea how to process, an immeasurable amount of guilt for a death he caused. He tells himself that finding the people responsible for Lena's death will make everything right. But here's what the game understood that most people missed. This was never going to fix anything, because Aiden Pearce wasn't hunting for justice. He was running from his own emotions. And the game shows us this almost immediately. After the opening mission, Aiden wakes up from a nightmare, a flashback of the night Lena died. And instead of sitting with it, instead of processing what he's feeling, he goes hunting for criminals. Not because it helps, not because it fixes anything, but because movement is the only thing that keeps the grief from catching up with him. And that becomes the defining pattern of the entire game. Aiden uses the vigilante as a shield, something to hide behind so he never has to stop long enough to feel the weight of what he's carrying. Because the vigilante acts, the vigilante moves, the vigilante doesn't have to grieve, but Aiden Pearce does. In a lot of ways, he shares something with Walker from Spec Ops: The Line. These are both men so consumed by what they're chasing that they've convinced themselves that the destination will fix everything. That when they finally find the person responsible for their misery, everything will make sense and everything will be fixed. But it never is, because the person responsible was always closer than either of them wanted to admit. Aiden spends the entire game pointing fingers at Damien Brinks, his former partner whose greed set everything in motion, at the mysterious second hacker who exposed them, at Maurice, the trigger man behind the hit. And Damien in particular is pretty fascinating, because while he is using Aiden's sister as leverage to get what he wants, he's also doing something else entirely. He's holding up a mirror. Damien keeps telling Aiden that Lena's death was also his fault, that his actions, his choices, his life put her in his car that night, and Aiden refuses to hear it. He'd rather hunt every criminal in Chicago than sit with the possibility that Damien is right, because the moment he stops, the moment he actually faces what happens, he has to admit that he's been running away from something since the night Lena died. This was never about justice. Everything he is doing for himself. And nothing makes that clearer than a single scene early in the game. Aiden visits Lena's grave with his sister Nikki, and Nikki tells him she knows what he's doing. She asks him to stop. She tells him that he's putting Jackson, her son, Aiden's nephew, in danger. And Aiden blows her off completely. Now, just sit with that for a moment here, because this isn't a case of Nikki being paralyzed by grief while Aiden pushes forward for her sake. Nikki and Jackson are moving on. They're dealing with the consequences of that night. They're trying to heal. They're doing exactly what people do when tragedy strikes. The only one who is stuck is Aiden. And that's the moment that Watch Dogs stops being a revenge story. Because if this was really about Lena, if it was really about justice, about family, about doing what's right, then Aiden would have stopped when the people he was doing it for asked him to. But he didn't, which means this was never about them. Watch Dogs isn't a game about a lackluster vigilante hunting down criminals. It's a game about a man so consumed by guilt and grief that stopping, even for a single moment, would mean drowning in the emotions he's been running from since the night Lena died. And even the ending refuses to give him peace. After you find everyone responsible, after the credits roll, the game gives you one final choice. Do you kill Maurice or let him go? Either way, what follows is a voiceover of Aiden saying he'll continue to protect Chicago. And that's the line that tells you everything. Aiden got what he wanted. He found everyone. He did what he set out to do. And with his skills, with his intelligence, his resources, and his ability to disappear, he could walk away and build something resembling a life. But he doesn't, because everything he did, every criminal he hunted, every person he killed, none of it solved the real problem. It never absolved him of the guilt, or it never brought Lena back. And so he keeps going, not because Chicago needs him, but because facing his emotions is the one thing he still cannot do. And yet people called this bad writing. They criticized Aiden for being dark and broody, for never lightening up, for refusing to be the kind of protagonist they wanted him to be. But let me ask you something a little bit personal here. How would you act if a niece you loved deeply was murdered and you never dealt with it? Would you be happy-go-lucky? Would you crack jokes and smile your way through the next chapter of your life? No, you wouldn't, because I know that if any of my nieces were ever taken from me in this way, I would be a complete and utter mess. The story of Watch Dogs couldn't have worked with a different version of Aiden, because the story isn't about a hero. It's about a man whose only way to cope with the consequences of his actions is to keep moving, to keep hunting, to never stop long enough to feel what he actually feels. We've seen the evidence, the nightmares, the criminal hunting, the refusal to listen to Nikki, the ending voiceover that proves he was never going to walk away regardless of what the outcome was. All of it points to the same truth. Aiden Pearce wasn't a badly written character. He was a misunderstood one.